We could do the old high school leadership thing where you repeat, we do something like, we feel good. Oh, we feel so good. So how you feeling? We feel good. Oh, I feel so good.
It's pretty weak.
Even if it is a lie. So lie with me, will ya? You really must not be very awake because I just said lie with me. I meant lie as in tell a false thing, but you guys are a rough crowd this morning. All right. Good morning, good morning. We have an exciting day ahead of us. And we also have a day that we can hold in a particular kind of way because as hard as it is to believe, today is also the day we're going to start saying goodbye to people. So if you are one of the people who is leaving today, please be sure that you do what you need to do to say goodbye. And if you're one of those people who wants to just walk out the door without ever anybody realizing you're leaving, that's okay too. But know that a little part of us goes with you, and we're sending you virtual whatever you need, hugs or whatever. So go gently if you are going today. And so we this morning are going to have two panels that are going to go. So you can imagine the timing on that and how tight it is. And so panels 2 and 3, you're both going to go this morning. And we're going to facilitate that and keep things moving. And we also want to give you each the time you need. So in addition, it's both, it's all. We're confident we can do all of that. And then if we don't, we'll, punt. Go to plan B, exactly. We're also, this morning, first thing, going to hear from some of the directors of our various organizations. And so I want to invite this morning Tricia and Alex and John and either Dick or Ralph are each going to spend a few minutes telling us something, whatever they want to, about the organization they are serving. So Tricia, why don't you come on up first? I thought going first would be a good thing. It's like you drew the short straw or something over there.
It's just, we don't know what we're doing, so we wanted somebody to go first so we know what we're supposed to do. So now you have me. Hi, currently serving the Covenant Network of Presbyterians as national organizer for the last almost 15 years. Was on the PLGC/MLP board before that. During the time when PLGC and MLCN became MLP, we Presbyterians love our acronym. And so I'll greet you on behalf of my colleague Brian Ellison, who's really sorry he can't be here, who's our executive director, and lift up the name of my former colleague Pam Byers, who would be here for sure if she and is here. Thank you, Lisa, in the Communion of Saints, and celebrating with all of us during this season of coming to some sort of, not the end, obviously, because we know we're all going forward and there's lots of work to do, but coming to a point where maybe we don't have to struggle over what the Book of Order of the PCUSA says anymore. So, hooray for tonight. So the Covenant Network's been in business since 1997 and trying to work on these issues. And going forward, we know that even though the Book of Order may have changed, that does not mean that the church is where it needs to be. And so we are going to be thinking about what it means to go forward in ministry, in what will become the new normal, and how we solidify the kind of church that God's calling us all to be. What exactly that's going to look like is being figured out, and we will live that out. But the inclusiveness of all God's people and the unity of the church going forward have been the goals of the Covenant Network since we started, and they still are. And so going forward, yay, what shall we do? We don't go. There'll be general assemblies, and we'll know there will be congregations and sessions that need to have partners working with them to figure out how to be the church today and tomorrow. And so we're going to be there for that.
What's the latest vote
on that? To my knowledge, 98 Presbyterians have voted in favor of Amendment 14F. I think 44 are in the no column or something like that, but we're better than 2-1 at the moment, which is pretty awesome. And we have about 29 or so Presbyterians yet to either vote or report. I don't know the vote dates of all the Korean language Presbyterians and such, so there's still some of those that may have voted that I'm not aware of. But so 98, and there's the next ones I'm aware of are Tuesday coming up. Presbyterian of San Francisco is one of them, and I think maybe Lake Michigan. Anyway, there's some more coming in. So I think that one of the things, this is just me, and then I'll give it over to whoever lucky person gets to come next. Alex, okay. I think that the church really needs to figure out what it means to live the principles of what I am reasonably confident will be the next document in our Book of Confessions, the Belhar Confession. I mean, we're getting close to that. It's not, we don't have the 114 yet, but it looks like that's going to happen. And the principles in Belhar are really important to our issues, but to all issues of justice and unity and reconciliation in the church. And so my prayer for the PCUSA is that we will figure out, not that, isn't it great we put that into the Confessions on the shelf? No, we need to figure out what it means to live into that. And I think that personally, I think that's where we all need to go. And so I could talk about it more, but it won't. Lucky you.
I'm not Alex. I wish. No, I'm John Russell Singer. I'm the newest executive director of Purity, which many of you have known as Presbyterian Welcome, which started in 1997, and Cliff was our first director. And we just got to meet yesterday for the first time. So that's great. So Mika Vandersall led our organization and was my mentor, and I got to know her through the program that we are best known for, I think, which is our retreat program for inquirers and candidates, people who are seeking ordination that are LGBT in the PCUSA. And so now we call that program the Emerging LGBTQ Pastors Retreat, because we have a new wonderful problem, which is supporting people who are recently ordained, because we now exist as people. There's a whole, and not that we didn't exist before, but there's this whole community coming out of seminaries quickly and looking for first calls, which don't so much exist. So we work with that community and giving them support and relationships and a place to gather once a year. And then when I came to work with the organization out of seminary in 2012, we started our outreach to LGBTQ and allied youth in New York City, which has been really exciting. It takes, I think, all of the goodness that's in this room and these kind of conversations in the spirit of kind of unapologetic love of ourselves and the gospel out into the streets. And so we are working with youth who are in congregations who are not going to be signing on to marriage equality anytime soon, but do see a need to work with their youth. And so we work around reconciling identity and faith in those spaces. And then we also have Not So Churchy, which is a another unapologetically affirming place. It's one of the 1001 worshiping communities. And so it's interesting that we now list as one of our major donors the Presbyterian Church USA, because they support our new worshiping community. And that is in Brooklyn, and Mika is the organizing pastor of that. And so that's the joke about me being her boss, is that she still runs one of our programs. And so the name change, these are the three things that we do: emerging pastors, youth, and not so churchy. And the name change came around the question of who have we become as an organization that was founded around a very particular polity issue. And now that that's, as Tricia kind of named, working itself through, thanks to the work of all of you, where does that leave us? And so we really tried to own our role as a pastoral organization that has found this niche, creating spaces for queer people. And so parity is that, which we worked with the branding team who had no idea that that's a very Presbyterian and feminist word, but they brought it to us and we said, oh, interesting. Actually was against it first and now I love it. But it's the idea that we, in the spaces that we work in, we put gender and sexuality at the same level of importance as faith, which a lot of people want to subordinate one of those things, and we say, no, this is equally important to our healing, and they must be a parity for us to become whole people. So that's the idea behind it. And so that's what we're doing going forward. We're going to keep doing more of what we do. Thank you.
I was like, I should run with a microphone. Like, all right, party people. It's early. First cup of coffee.
Whoa, Ralph
Yeah.
Carter!
Woohoo!
Ralph Carter's in the house! Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Ralph. Happy birthday to you. Alex, you say party and you see what happens.
I'll say party and rock walks in. I think that's appropriate. Hey everybody, I'm Alex McNeil, and for the past year and a half, since 2013, I've been the executive director of More Light Presbyterian. Have you heard of this? I'm curious, how many folks in here have served with More Light in some capacity, either on the board, as an organizer, a GA? This is why I'm so glad to be here, because y'all are the folks that really helped bring More Light into being and give it its legs and help us think about what it is we're going to be doing next. We have two current board members in the room, Robin White and a fabulous Ralph Carter, serving on the More Light board, so that's a fun time. When I started in 2013, we had a couple of landscapes before us that I was really brought on to help think through. One was working towards this General Assembly and an amendment and authoritative interpretation. What were we going to do for the church around allowing folks to be married within the Presbyterian Church? And we worked very closely with the Covenant Network the whole way through up to the General Assembly, at the General Assembly, following the General Assembly to get where we are now. I think it's no coincidence that we achieved ratification in March, 2 months ahead of where we did in our ordination, because of the hard work, the collaboration, and the many conversations that happened across the country around marriage. So it was really brought on to help us get to that point. I have a background in organizing, and I worked on the 10A campaign. But also, even as I started in 2013, More Light was starting to think about what happens after ratification, what happens after marriage, starting to put that dream out there. It seemed so impossible back in 2013 would we actually get it. What More Light did was we did a couple of studies. We interviewed some folks who've been with us for a long time, some folks who are just coming in, and really identified some key priority areas for us, which one, marriage, two, thinking about how our churches live into their welcome, making it real and tangible and felt in every church that calls itself More Light, and those that are exploring becoming intentionally inclusive. And then the third was a piece that was identified just wholeheartedly was around intersectionality. And I thought it was really amazing to hear yesterday about how early that conversation started, because I think for some of the LGBT movement, it's just finally become a topic of conversation, but I'm proud of Presbyterians for thinking of it early on, that our movements are related, our identities, ourselves are related. So how do we, as a More Light movement, really hold that together and bring that to the forefront within our churches and in ourselves. So what I worked with the board to do was to think about what's our plan. And so we spent 6 months dreaming and scheming and plotting and analyzing, and came up with a plan that we're going to be unveiling in the next few weeks to months, like over the next couple of months, and it's really going to come out at our national conference, which is going to be in Louisville at Central Presbyterian Church, September 18th through 20th. So you're all officially invited, and I think it's going to be a really amazing time, almost coming full circle. Back or in Louisville, someone said we want it to be as fun as we imagine. Like, it's going to be a hoot name. Careful. But to really have this be a pivotal moment in thinking about what is the next era of our movement. How do we move forward? How do we live this out, as Tricia said? And how do we partner with our congregations to really do that? So some of the things I've done in the past year have really been centered around going to our different member churches and doing a session around gender identity and sexual orientation, for example. A lot of churches came to me with the hunger to know more about transgender folks and the transgender issues and how to talk about it, how to be loving in that conversation. So I have a workshop that I've sort of toured around to do around that builds empathy rather than having just trans folks kind of on a pedestal. To think about our own gender narratives. I've gone to other congregations and just had conversations with them about where is the need in your community for serving LGBT people. So a church in San Antonio started housed the LGBT youth group because they saw in their own community there was no place for LGBT folks to go, for young folks to go. So it's those kinds of kind of micro level thinking at the congregational level. What are the needs that your community has, and how can we partner with you to meet that? What resources do you need? What network partners do you need to know to be able to do that more fully? So I'm really excited about the future, and I couldn't be as excited about the future without the commitment that y'all have had to bringing us here. I'm really in this space feeling so uplifted by the stories that I've been hearing and the work and the prayer and the thought that has gone into bringing us to where we are. So I want to end by saying thank you.
I want to thank you. I want to give you a stole that was given to me when I was serving with MLP. It has been such a joy to meet you and to experience just a tiny glimpse here, the incredible work you are doing. You are gifted and called, and I'm so proud to know you in doing this work.
So either
Ralph or Dick?
Come on down,
So there are 3 from Presbyterian Promise, 4 really. Jack is an honorary member. He was one of our founding people. Dan Blackford, Dick Haspany, all here. Maybe I should start by saying that in New England, Presbyterianism is a little bit regionalized, and we speak with a slightly different accent. And those of you who've traveled across the Hudson River know that in UCC land, it's different. Press Promise was formed in the chaos of G 60106B becoming law. That's a long story. I could use more time than Ray will let me have before he shuts off the fader.
It's off.
To tell you about that. I want to mention a couple of things that Presbyterian Promise has been involved in and is doing. But I will start by saying that even in the process through 1999 of writing our vision and mission statements, we said the church is in an untenable place. We have to organize for when justice prevails. Among the things that we did, we remember that the Presbyterian Church runs on the mimeograph machine. We did a study, we wrote a report, and we gave it the felicitous name of the Reconciling Dialogue Project. This was done with the Plowshares Institute, Bob and Alice Evans. And the attempt was to help us as we tried to talk with people who didn't understand what we were talking about. How do we hear them, and how do we speak in a way that they can hear? How do we know if they've heard what we've said? And we did some of this work with our own churches. We invited churches, the other Presbyterians, without a great deal of success. But it started paying off in some other ways. We, through doing this work, brought Bob and Alice and a bunch of the leaders of this movement together here in Stony Point. And we think it was in 2006 or 7, but we found out we were doing this without time to do the research. And with Bob and Alice began to build the connections so that when we got to GA, we were on the same page and knew how to deal with our issues. So there has been a real payoff with that. Right now, our focus recently has been on work with youth. We just did a program, Ray was there, at Wesleyan University, which was organized by their students, a panel discussion, an interfaith panel on the place of LGBTQ in the faith community. The familiar phrase one of them came up with was, it's easier to be gay than it is to be a person of faith in the university community. And I've heard that over the years. Also, we're working with True Colors, which is the project of Robin McHalen. It's a Connecticut project. She's a social worker who seems to have organized an enormous number of people. There's an annual True Colors conference at the University of Connecticut Stores, which brings thousands of young people together around gender issues. And we were there as a table, and one of our board members did a workshop on how the arts enter into spirituality. So we're exploring how we do this. We have been a presence at every presbytery meeting since they allowed us on the floor. You know, we went through that process of can you be was it chapter 9 was the old thing with the National Book of Order? Well, there's some local paragraph, so we're an acknowledged piece of it, so we can present an annual report, and we have a table at the presbytery meeting, and so we tried to allow the people of Southern New England who were progressive to find their voice and to actually say what they believe in a meaningful way.
Thank you, Rob.
Hey everybody, just 30 seconds of announcements. 2 things that we need your help with. The first is we're going to be really busy this weekend after you leave. We have to flip all of your rooms tomorrow in order to use them again tomorrow night, which is great news for us. And we need your help. If you could plan ahead to check to be ready to drop a key off at the front desk when you come for breakfast tomorrow morning. Yeah, you can bring luggage over with you and set it in the areas by the bathrooms, or we'll find a place for you to put luggage so that you can let go. And then we'll have our housekeepers in first thing tomorrow morning to try and get those rooms ready to turn around by tomorrow at noon. That would be really helpful. And then the second is similar. We try never to do this and don't have a choice this time, and I've assured my staff that you all understand that although change is lost, change is possible. And that the bottom line is we need this room tomorrow also. So we're gonna move us for our last session tomorrow morning over to Maple A, the larger conference room in Maple. And tonight as we finish, I'm gonna ask if there are 6 or 7 people who could help me take things off walls and take sound equipment and move it over there and transplant us so that when we come in tomorrow morning, we don't feel like we've been totally disrupted, but actually the life of the community has carried on in that other space. Okay, so I'll look for that help tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Rick. So, did somebody have a question? Yeah.
No need to strip your beds. Just leave the rooms and take your things out, and that's all we need from you.
Just have your clothes on when you.
Say nothing.
Good clarification. So we have had some new people join us. If you have joined us since last evening, would you please stand, and we'd love to give you a minute to say, who are you, where are you located, and how happy are you to be here? So we'll start with Cliff.
Well, good morning, and my name is Cliff Frazier, and I'm extremely happy to be here. This is a dream come true to be with you at this point in all of the progress that's been made. Let's see, John said I worked for Presbyterian Welcome. That's true, a number of years ago. And now I'm still in New York City, and I'm at New York University. And that's my story. I'd love to catch up with all of you individually. So I'm here for you this evening.
Great.
Okay.
Welcome, Cliff. Who else came in?
Hi everyone, my name is James Rowe. I'm the director of Believe Out Loud. And I'm actually here today because, well, as much as I want to support all of you, my hero, Chris, is here, and I've never had the opportunity to meet him in person. I found this book 20 years ago, and as you can see, it's had a lot of wear and tear. I must have bought 20 to 30 copies of these books to give out over the past 2 decades, and my hand is shaking. I don't know what I would have done. When about 20 years ago, I went to my first Pride Parade in New York, and the Westboro Baptist Church was there, holding their signs. And up until that point, I was quite comfortable with my faith and my sexuality. But for some reason, I just started to question for a second when I saw those signs. And so I immediately ran to the bookstore to find some books to hopefully educate myself. And this was the first book I found. And I haven't been happier ever since I had this book, and it just changed my world, and I just adore this man. So, and Believe Out Loud, where I work, we're an online network empowering Christians to work for LGBTQ equality. We do that through storytelling, cultivating dialogue, and inspiring action through campaigns. So if you ever choose to wish to blog for us, please reach out to me, and we'd be happy to share your story at Believe Out Loud. Thank you.
Oh my goodness, it is so good to be here. All right, I'm just a Florida boy who moved to New York State. So south of I-10 to north of 90. So this is kind of it was a little bit of a journey, and so the whole thing was got to get away from home so that I could come out and be myself. And I had no idea that I was, can you integrate your sexuality and your spirituality? And there, and I moved to Rochester, and I had no idea that was the home of Susan B. Anthony. It was the home of Frederick Douglass.
you know, and it's kind of the being informed by the native people, that informed our Constitution as a country. I mean, you know, it's just an incredible thing, and to discover within the first 3 months of being there about PLGC gathering and getting involved with that. Where's Keith? Keith?
Audra? Where are you,
Okay, well,
Audra?
Keith, huh? He's here. Okay. Well, I'm dying to, so many people I'm just really dying to say hello to that I've not seen in a long time. But this is really just incredible, this kind of opportunity, and to have lost people along the way, that I really am saddened by. But I really do understand, or I think I understand that. But at the same time, the kind of tenacity of the folks in this room to have, first of all, to be able to have a vision that is nowhere in sight, but is in your heart. And it's the spark, it's the divinity inside of us that is yearning to break free. And it's just been an incredible journey. And it's kind of hard to believe that we actually do have marriage equality now. We actually can have our gifts recognized formally in the church. There's a lot of work to do. A lot of work to do regarding marriage. In the conversations early on about bisexuality, and my God, a lot of work to do there. A lot of work to do on gender issues. We have so much work ahead of us. But I'm delighted to be here. I'm really looking forward to connecting with longtime friends and to make new ones. So, thank you.
Did I miss anybody? Is there anybody else that's come in since last night that would like to say hello? Great. So we're going to spend a few minutes kind of opening our time here. So group number 2, be ready, because after our singing and reading and all of that, you're going to be up here on the panel. So we're going to move into, you'll need your little booklets for this part. And I need mine too. So if you would turn to Friday morning.
16.
Page 16. We are going to start by singing Live into Hope. And then I would love a volunteer to read that Luke scripture. And then we'll kind of, and a volunteer to read the It Was the Time portion. So if you want to do those things, let me know while we're singing. All right, stand as you're able and let's sing together.
God's word and must be
our first reading for us here.
The 1993 General Assembly recommended a 3-year dialogue on homosexuality. In 1994, the Permanent Judicial Commission found the ordination of a gay and lesbian deacon by Central Presbyterian Church in Eugene irregular, but non-reversible. In 1995, Martha Juliera and Tammy Lindahl, my lovely seminary roommate, initiated the Sour of Skulls project to commemorate the ministries denied, fulfilled, and or closeted of LGBT leaders. Greater Atlanta Presbytery continued its recognition of the Reverend Dr. Erin Swenson's ministry in 1996 after her transition from male to female.
Yay.
The Covenant Network of Presbyterians was founded in 1997 to remove the codification of the prohibition on LGBT ordination adopted earlier that year, known as G.60. 06B. Would you like to say it together?
G60106B.
In 1999, Presbyterians for Lesbian Gay Concerns merged with the More Like Churches Network to form More Like Presbyterians, led by regional coordinators Michael Adey and Katie Morrison. GA voted to delete G60106B in 2001, but a majority of presbyteries did not approve the change. Sad. That happened in 2011. A few weeks ago, the denomination ratified Amendment 14F, approving marriage equality. And here we are.
Unless somebody else wanted to read the scripture. please.
Yeah, another voice.
Would you guys like to act it all out? All right. I would do that, but I gotta keep my clothes on. Luke 4:14 through 20. Jesus returned in the power of the Spirit to Galilee, and his reputation spread throughout the region. He was teaching in the Galilean synagogues, and all were loud in their praise. Jesus came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up. Entering the synagogue on the Sabbath, as was his habit, Jesus stood up to do the reading. When the book of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him, he unrolled the scroll and found the passage where it was written. Let's do all this together. All right? The Spirit of God is upon me, because the Most High has anointed me to bring good news to those who are poor. God has sent me to proclaim liberty to those held captive, recovery of sight to those who are blind, and release to those in prison, to proclaim the year of God's favor. Rolling up the scroll, Jesus gave it back to the attendant and sat down. And the eyes of all in the synagogue were fixed on him. Radical that he was. Radical he was. Disturber of the peace.
Yes.
So at this point, I would like to invite panel number 2 to come on up and find your places up here. And I want to give you a little bit of overview of the rest of the day so that you know what's coming. So we're going to do 2 panels this morning, which means I'm going to be a little bit ruthless with the microphone. So when I come and stand near you, I'm hoping you won't be offended, but know that that's my way of moving us along. And, you know, yesterday we kind of started having a conversation about the future. We are going to have some time designated this afternoon to have that conversation in more detail. So after the 4th panel goes, we'll be moving into a conversation about the future.
We have enough? You have enough chairs? Okay.
I'm downstairs. Margaret's there.
Okay.
That's why you do what you do. I keep trying to do.
One quick announcement for those of you who have come in since last night. We're doing personal interviews, which we're calling formal interviews, but you don't have to have a formal attire on. In the room right down the hall. If you're only here for a day, put your name down on the list anyway. So Cliff, if you want to do a personal interview, put your name down on the list even if slots are taken, and we'll figure out how to do your interview. And there are also time slots for tomorrow morning for those of you that are staying. So be sure we get you on this list if you'd like to have a personal interview.
And 1 second before we go, just, I'm Ray Bagnwaldo, the lesbian evangelist that follows Janie and Lisa, in case you didn't know that. And tomorrow morning, those who are departing, we will have a schedule this afternoon, and I'll find all of you, but the schedule's tomorrow morning, so if you're thinking about that.
Great. So this is the panel from 1978 to 1985. And I want all of us to be on the same page time-wise. I'm going to bring this whole discussion, including what you're saying and questions and comments, to a close by 10:55.
Oh, word almighty. Marvin.
Well, let's begin then. We left off this with the story in 1978 after, I'm Dan Smith. After General Assembly, can we read this thing?
You can stand up and move.
You can slide down too.
You can move.
I've already done it.
Oh, we make new friends.
So, in 1978, as the General Assembly was voting, Commissioner asked the stated clerk of the then United Methodist Church, what does definitive guidance mean? Since that would be the guiding rules of the church. And the stated clerk said, well, these are his exact words. It's like when you have a teenage child and they come to you with a question, you give them definitive guidance as to what you believe. And he left it open that would mean that then the child, the adolescent, would be able to make the decision for themselves. As soon as the General Assembly adjourned, he then interpreted that to mean that was constitutional law of the church, not guidance. And that deception and that bending of the rules and that anything to stop gay and lesbian people is what ensued in the next decade. Every single step of what we chronicled in our 10-year period was one attempt after another to stop us. For example, we were talking about Chapter 28 was the original thing to get recognition by the church. We couldn't get it at first, so we were in other people's booths with Witherspoon, and then we got it, and they changed it to Chapter 9. Then after years of debate, they said, we're eliminating Chapter 9 from the Book of Order. It's too controversial. So everything we did, they just kept changing the rules, and we were fighting like crazy, but we also had no organization yet. We were just groups of people. And so all the organizational stuff had to be done during this decade, and it was just a tremendous time of bringing people together, organizing and acting. But the other issue that was so huge at that time was that there were so few out people in the church. There were a lot of, Chris and I kind of were the first generation of younger people at that point in time who were out, and almost everybody else was heterosexually married and closeted in the church. It was ordained. So we had a terrible problem getting people in positions of authority to speak out of fear. And it was a ministry of organizing, but of also caring for each other and just constantly working. And every time you think you had it, somebody would change the rules of the game and we'd be back to zero. We could always get things through committee, and every time we got to General Assembly, bang, it would just fall. So it was a terribly difficult time. And then in the middle of this decade, around 80, we hit the AIDS health crisis. And then we had to start taking care of each other and watching our own die. So this was a very weird decade of work and organizing. And we're going to just go around and share some of our stories on that.
Well, as Dan talked, I'm Barry Smith. no relation, just brothers in Christ. As you mentioned, the national situation, a lot of actions shifted to the local more light churches or local churches that were striving to be more light. And that was the case at my church. And you saw a little bit from the slideshow yesterday that I was nominated by the nominating committee of my church, Lincoln Park Presbyterian, in 1979 for the session, only to find out a few weeks later from the head of the nominating committee that there was going to be a nomination from the floor. One of David Sin's friends was going to nominate him from the floor. And so therefore the election was cast in doubt. And I, being a closeted gay person at that point who had told no one at the church about my story, was suddenly wondering, oh, what am I getting myself into? And to sit through a congregational meeting that was an hour and a half long, where 25 people from the congregation debated whether it was right to elect a gay person or not. And David Sin, who was honest and open about who he was, in the end was not elected, and I, as a gay person who was silent, was elected. Was not a good position for me to be in for the next couple of years. I thought, I'm just gonna let this thing rest for a while and just go on about my business of serving. But the congregation had also chosen to set up a task force at the same time to try and change something in typical Presbyterian way, because they felt sorry that David wasn't elected. And that damn task force reported its session every month. And so the issue was constantly in front of me. Eventually I realized, and this phrase wasn't to come into existence until later in the AIDS movement, but silence does equal death. And I realized that when I was up for re-election 3 years later as for another term of the session, I was not going to be silent. And I met with David Sint and I apologized to him, and he was incredibly gracious to me. And that was a lesson to me, as when we've been faced with so many vicious opponents, but at the same time, we have to give them a little space to change their minds, and we need to extend that graciousness to them like it has been extended to us. Anyway, I talked to the nominating committee for my second term and said I want to be run as an openly gay man. And everything, of course, in the nominating committee is supposed to be confidential. Within a couple of days, the entire congregation knew about it. And it became a big deal. The nominating committee was besieged by calls, pro and con. There were some opponents who threatened to withhold pledges, leave the church, the usual stuff. Our pastor resigned. We were suddenly in an interim situation. I was clerk of session, actually, now carrying a ton of responsibility, trying to keep things together. It was a really difficult time, anxious, stress-filled. And at the same time, there was a tremendous amount of support from the congregation. Even those who were opposed to me made sure that they knew that I was loved as a person. One of the interesting things during that time, they ended up talking about the opposition. Well, the presbytery got wind of this, and they sent the head of what was now the committee of ministry out to counsel us. And we were told in no certain terms that this was in 1982. The pending reunion between the two Presbyterian denominations would be wrecked if we went forward with this. No pressure. After he left, interestingly enough, another person on the session came out publicly. And I think people realize this isn't just about David Sin or Barry Smith, it's about a whole bunch of people. And that really gave us the impetus to push on, and that month before the election was one of the most stressful periods in my life, but I'm happy to say that I was elected. We had a long judicial process where we had to file suit against the presbytery. Usually they're filing charges against us. We actually initiated it because they would not appoint a moderator to our church, being an interim situation, that would install me. They appointed someone that was hostile to our cause. But we filed suit against the presbytery, a long, involved thing, not nearly as torturous as things like Jeannie have gone through numerous times. But as Dan said, the official church bodies did everything they could to postpone, delay, give us misleading information. How we ever got through that, I'm not sure. But during the process, reunion did happen, and there was a new book of order, and the general council of the presbytery said, you have to have another election because everything that you've been fighting about in the older book of order is now moot. So we had another election. I was elected again, this time with even a bigger majority. And we had a moderator, Bill Lovell, who was an interim pastor. We had changed moderators. He had gone to jail for being a conscientious objector in World War II. He had gone to jail for integrating lunch counters during the civil rights movement. So he installed me. And we were successful. And just as an end note, what happened at Lincoln Park Church after that is it became a normal thing. The nominating committee just considered gay and lesbian people as just one of, anyone, like anyone else in the congregation. And from then on, it was never an issue. Although everyone was motivated to continue to work for change in the denomination. But this was something that was reflected in many more like churches across the country during this decade.
I'm Gail Russell, also from Lincoln Park Presbyterian Church in Chicago. So I was on the session with Barry and was reelected the same year he was. I also was at that point working for the Presbytery of Chicago in a job that I really loved. And once this suit happened, I was told by the executive presbytery of the state clerk that I could not be part of the session meeting section that was discussing the case. So if I cared about my job, I needed to remove myself from that part of the session meeting. Well, this is very painful. And meanwhile, that was probably 1983, I would say, that was happening. And meanwhile, as a straight ally, I also was beginning a very intense friendship with Jerry Mead, who was now my wife. But didn't know that I was lesbian. But it was just a very hurtful time because I wanted to be there to support Barry. I wanted to be part, and I was part of advocating, but I couldn't be part of the session meeting. And so I would go to the session, we would have our regular business, and then I would be excused to another room and I would read or I would fall asleep. But I was just so upset, and I asked Barry's forgiveness for not being part of that because I just hated it. It was a very difficult time, personally for me, but a very exciting time in our church.
Well, I'm Cleve Evans, and like I said, I went to every General Assembly from '85 on, and so everything runs together in my mind. And so I don't remember exactly what year a lot of stuff happened, but going back to the beginning in 1980, my personal theology, because I've never been to seminary, is rather naive. I sort of always see God working in coincidences, and one of the things I remember about the Detroit Assembly, I told you last time about how Northside Presbyterian had done the research that the Assembly from San Diego wanted everybody to do, and I got myself on the committee, and we made a statement that neither ordination nor marriage should be barred to people because of sexual orientation. And then they asked me to be on session because I had done such a good job on the homosexuality committee, is the way they put it. And and so I was elected and ordained an elder. And then when General Assembly came to Detroit in 1980, I went and became part of the national movement. And one of the things remembered, my pastor at Northside happened to be one of the commissioners from Detroit Presbyterian to the 1980 Assembly. And one of the things that he said, he was a classmate of Janie's in seminary, and he ran into Janie at the Assembly Hall in Detroit, and he, and asked her what had been going on in her life, and she told him, for minutes, and she gave all of his stuff, and she ended up, and here we are in Detroit, and we're going out to this church in Ann Arbor tomorrow, and he said, yes, I know, that's my church, which was, I think, one of those wonderful coincidences that I think is always happening in this movement. And the other thing, which is still part of this, I didn't go to the assemblies in 81 or 82, and then 83, which was the Union Assembly in Atlanta. I decided I really, really had to go. And even though you would think that I was 30 years old, or they should have known better, I just took the amount of money it would have taken me to eat in Ann Arbor, and I didn't even realize what of course you need a lot more money, for eating in restaurants in Atlanta. And Barry Williams, I'm so glad his picture was shown. It's somebody who was early on that a lot of people don't remember. He was a lawyer from the Tampa area in Florida, and was a wonderful person, and was one of the few people at the beginning of the movement who had a good income. And so I was a poor graduate student. I remember in Atlanta, he just kept handing me money, all week, so that I could eat and take care of myself. And I had done Atlanta completely on faith. I took the train from Ann Arbor to Chicago, and then John, I wish I remember his last name, who's pastor in Milwaukee. Right. John Gregg picked me up and drove me to Atlanta, and I hadn't even gone and didn't know how I was going to get back from Atlanta. And I met a classmate from Duke who had been a year ahead of me at Duke, who was a Presbyterian minister there, and he drove me then back to Lynchburg, Virginia, where my parents lived, after the assembly, and I didn't even know that I was going to get to see my parents that summer, until that point. And so just that, the fact that I went to Atlanta completely on faith, and it all worked out beautifully, is probably one of the reasons why I stayed with the movement and ended up being the person who went to every assembly from 1985 to 2014.
Diana Besmar Bailey, point of personal privilege. I would like you to share a moment with me to send some wonderful, good energy to my spirit brother, therefore your brother-in-law, Kevin Lawson, who is sitting before the Ministerial Fellowship Committee of the Unitarian Universalist Association, his final step toward ordination. He would love you. He would love being here. So a moment for Kevin. I didn't know I'd have a microphone while he was meeting with the committee. This is so swell. I was at the 1978 General Assembly, along with so many of you. I was so sad by the result, and yet so taken up by the energy of you all who were there. It touched my heart as an ally. And then in 1980, I fell in love with a woman, and therefore joined so many in a closet. And I wondered if, since I was straight at the time I was ordained, if that would, hold. My minister colleague, Jim Cook, said, you have to meet Gus and Charcint. And I said, who are they? And I did meet them, and we fell in love immediately. My kids thought of them as their grandma and grandpa, which they were. And I see heads nodding. And weren't they mom and dads? So many of us. I joined PLGC. We had a rocky road. I'll spare you the details.
the thing that was so painful for me was that I could not say, as a lesbian, I. So that was hard on me. And I was one of the many who just kind of hid behind Janie. And I know it was hard for you. We love you. Thank you for making that sacrifice. And I came out publicly in 1989 on the floor of Presbytery and said, wrapping up my comments, David Sint stood at a General Assembly and said, is anyone else out there gay? David, I know you're listening. Cut me in.
My name is Jean Richardson, and I think where I want to start my comments is my heart was so warmed, or I was so grateful to watch the work of Pam Beyer at Old First Church, because I served as an intern there. I served as an assistant pastor there. They squeaked me in as an associate pastor there. But like many women in ministry knew, we were always the first one on the budget cut. Every year, we were the first one on the budget cut. And so during this time, women were not only finding their way into churches, lesbian women had this double push and struggle. And so there were many of us who were somewhere in and out of the closet, or somewhere we lived in kind of Middle Earth. It was safe for me at the seminary, it was safe for me with Janie, it was safe for me with some friends. We all went to Peg's place down, and you know, this was a very turbulent time. And yet we were in these churches trying to follow a call that we believed was important. So what happened at Old First, which is really interesting, is the pressure started to mount and mount and mount, and they became more and more uncomfortable that I was as open as I was, even though I didn't stand before a presbytery. And I told the story yesterday that I actually had an elder come to me and had followed me to Peg's place and said to me, well, prove to me that you're not lesbian. And sleep with me. And so I had the courage to say to him, I will not sleep with you or any man in this congregation. And I went, so about toward the end of my time there, I started getting pretty outraged, and my old community organizing stuff started to kick in. And I was sitting with this wonderful woman that many of you know named Linda Bremner. Linda Bremner used to work for the National Church, and she was a great organizer, and she had just happened to inherit money from her mother. And she said, I want to do something subversive. Oh, I'm sorry. And so we sat down in the Mission at a women's place. They serve quiche and coffee and supper. And we sat there all morning, and we schemed up this idea called the Gifted Women's Clergy Conference. And the idea was we were going to send letters to all the closeted women we knew, but we couldn't tell each other. I mean, it was so secret. She had a list, I had a list. You know, the only person I think we could put on it was Jane Squire. You know, we got her down. But we didn't know how to go about this. So we created this list. And then we said, okay, now we've got a problem because you have a list, I have a list, but we don't know who slept together. We don't know if we're going to invite people that are going to be extremely uncomfortable together. So you and I have to share our list. So to the best of our knowledge, we shared our list. We figured out how to do this. We had so much money. We could invite so many people. So then the next thing was we worked with the National Church to send out these letters. And I composed the letter for myself because my session was being really tough. I have some real mixed feelings with Old First, so I'm really glad they have moved. But they were tough on me, and so I wrote this glowing letter Dear session of Old First Church, we are so pleased to inform you that the Reverend Jean Richardson has been chosen to attend the Gifted Women's Leadership Conference. We have chosen her because of her leadership ability, her work in the network, and it was glowing. It was so glowing. And I remember sitting in this room at Old First Church, it was yesterday, listening to them read it. And I said, this is so terrific. So we indeed had this conference. We did it for 3 years in a row. We invited these folks. We showed up at Grailville and we all walked in the door.
Yeah.
We all walked in the door. And Georgia Wilcoxon was she facilitated us all because there was so much pain in the room. And there was so much hurt. And we all kind of peeked out of our doors. And that was the Gifted Women's Clergy Conference that lasted for about 3 years.
Wow. So awesome. Jean, can we just see how many women here were at that? Can you stand up if you were one of those or raise your hand? I was the only one.
Can we say Anne Dubois' name?
Anne Dubois.
Anne Dubois was the one.
Anne
With
Dubois
the money, and so on, and she made that possible with Linda.
That's exactly
Yeah.
Yeah. Isn't it wonderful, all these diverse women we've had around, I love it. I had not heard that story before the other day. I'm Carol Seaton from Atlanta, and I started plugging in 1983. That was the second youth triennium, and PLGC had a booth and exhibit there, and I think that's the first time they got to have a real booth by themselves at an event.
Oh, I was a youth there.
Yeah, you were there. So I was ordained in 1980, and I went to the first triennium, and I was actually young enough to be in the youth category. Go figure. But anyway, in 83, so I met PLGC, was excited to learn about that, went back to Kansas City, and with Muriel Proudfoot, we started a chapter in Kansas City. Interesting process. They had to lay people coming to our meeting to say, I remember one quote in their article, a young woman, apparently not gay. So anyway. But during those years in the 80s, we were working with PLGC. I think the support and my openness to it helped my husband to find out. He knew we had had a relationship in the past, but didn't want to be gay, and we loved each other a lot. But found his true self, and working through a process, realized that it didn't make sense for us to be married anymore for his sake and for my sake. Really, I knew about 3 years before we got divorced, and in January of 1987, we were having our More Light chapter was meeting with the Catholic Church, and they were doing a panel, and Alan agreed to answer some questions. Mark Palermo was at that meeting. I remember that. Because I knew he was gay, but we're sitting there in this group of people, I don't know all of them. And so one of the other people just asked him a question. He was responding to the movie we'd seen. So, well, are you gay? Long pause in our life, and he said, yes, I am. And that I didn't know, you don't ask those questions in these, meetings where you might have allies. But I knew it, but now I had to know it in a different way. And that was the night before I was leaving for my first week of my DVN class. I was a basket case that week. It was not like, oh, well, because it affected me in a way I didn't know. Because I knew, but I didn't know the difference of when it's said out loud. Mm-hmm. But we went ahead. That's really what spurred. So it's time to be divorced. Relatively easy as divorces go. We didn't have kids, but started. And then that summer, I knew when Tammy and Martha were in the Presbytery, and I knew when Tammy came, she didn't know that a mutual friend of ours that she didn't know had outed her to me, because she wasn't going to be out. She was serving a rural parish, and she didn't have a partner, and she just thought she'd be single forever. But then for my birthday, I said, we're going to, concert, Hollinger's concert. So I took the children to the concert, and the only place we can go after this is this bar down the street. So they finally could come out to each other. So my claim to fame is I helped introduce them. the interesting thing, so here I am getting divorced from the gay man, and then Tammy finally really, they tell me they've got together, and so she really comes out to me and says, okay, you married a gay man, your best friend is lesbian. Off to the counselor we go to check this out. Went through that, it's like, nope, there's a lot have friends, there's just no feeling there, so we want to became an advocate working through our More Light. Was on the board of More Light through the last years of the 80s, and we get to the next group when 90 went to work at GA, but it was in 94 I met Nikki, and we were friends for a year, and then in 95 it was like ding ding ding, all the bells went off, and the rest is history. We've been together for 19 years. But the 80s were really being the straight ally and really trying to help, but realizing how that's not a risk. That wasn't a risk for me. But thank you for the people who risk so much more. But glad to be a part to have helped bring my voice to help others have their voice.
Hi, I'm Bob Patton. I'm from Los Angeles and Palm Springs. I want you to know that, I'm sorry, what kind of high verbal types you are. For an introvert like me, this is just an amazing thing. So, yes, I know them friends. I really appreciate the movement. I appreciate you being here. I've had a great time, but I'm going to pass. Okay.
I forgot to say one thing. I also went to journalism in '83 as part of that, and then from '85, I've been to every one since then too. So there's GA junkies up here.
How much time do we have left?
We have 25 minutes
Okay.
total, including group stuff.
Okay. Mark's gonna go.
Somehow I feel like I should be running back and forth
Yeah.
across this group and into group 3 because my involvement started in 1977 at age 24, Commissioner of General Assembly, and listening to 3 days of testimony, Sandy Broaders and many others talking to the Assembly Task Force on homosexuality. I was not elected to a committee that year. Synod of Lincoln Trails had 53 commissioners and only 50 could be on committees. And so the electing section said, well, you're young, you're only 24, you're gonna go to General Assembly again. So good luck for the next 3 days, do whatever you wanna do, So I thought, well, let me go and hear some of this testimony. Of course, I was confronting my own homosexuality, being gay, and being closeted up until that point. And there was a meeting of PGC then at the University of Pennsylvania where I heard more coming out stories and stories that paralleled mine so closely. And so it was time to come out. And the first person I came out to was Chris Glasser, and he said, make sure that you meet David Sint and get involved at the LGCC in Chicago, which I did, and met some really wonderful people, and Barry and Kristen Rand and eventually Lisa and so many others. And working with David Sint was just a joy. We would meet every third Sunday of the month and have worship and time for fellowship and also strategizing. And the LGC Chicago became really active during that time. We planned the 1985 Midwinter Conference that brought many of you to Lincoln Park. And it was just a fruition of all of the efforts that we had put into that. For me, Presbytery-wise, I had become rather involved with Presbytery, sitting on Church and Society Committee for 6 years, and then Worship, Music, and the Arts. So people were getting to know me, and then I was elected to the Presbytery Council. And then I found myself being nominated to be the moderator of Presbytery at age 29, which it was the 5th largest presbytery in the denomination at the time. And I thought, wow, this is like, maybe when I'm 30, maybe, 45, 60, I just wasn't ready for this. But, what amazed me was that they started out with 8 candidates and they narrowed it down to 2. And they had me running against a very conservative pastor who had been a Presbyterian moderator and a synod moderator who was from Kansas. And I think he thought that the election was all wrapped up and he was going to get it. Bob and Evelyn Davidson happened to be at the Presbytery that day. And I'm sure now, thinking in retrospect, that they probably talked to a few commissioners and maybe got them to switch their votes. And I was elected. It was just an overwhelming sense of joy that I could be who I was and be elected moderator. The state clerk and the executive presbyter who Gail worked with, and you know, sometimes they were very supportive and sometimes they weren't. But for me, they were very, very supportive, and they had, you know, they were a joy to work with, and my sexuality made no difference in the way that I moderated the Presbyterian meetings. We had one very conservative pastor in the Presbytery, and unfortunately he got up at one of the Presbyterian meetings one day and said, "I hear there's gay activity going on at our Presbyterian youth camp." And he said, and also the Church Federation of Chicago just voted to admit the MCC into its membership. We should leave. So it was quite troubling because the camp director had a transgender child. And for him, it was really, really difficult to hear those words because it was his family, it was his son and daughter. And what, of course, would happen was that the Presbytery decided to appoint the task force. And who did they let appoint the task force? The moderator. So I was able to sort of stack that task force. And of course, the task force met and did its work, as it should do, decently and in order. But of course, the recommendation came back that, of course, the Presbytery was going to stay in the Church Federation. And there was absolutely no validity to his claims. And so that was a nice repudiation that happened during my moderatorial term, and I was really pleased with that. It was just a great year. I went to Atlanta for the reunion. It was also the 150th anniversary of Presbyterians in Chicago. We did a lot of celebrating that year, and it was good to be involved, you know, locally and nationally with PLGC. Davidson was given the first Inclusive Church Award in 1984 at the Phoenix Assembly. I served as the last corresponding delegate for PLGC on the floor of General Assembly in '85 after Chapter 28, Chapter 9 was deleted. But I was on my way to becoming an officer at PLGC and then forming the More Light Churches Network later. It was just really a wonderful string of years. I attended General Assembly every year from 1980 to 1992. Being a teacher and being June, that was not the best time for teachers to go to General Assembly. And I remember having to save all of my sick days throughout the year so I'd have enough time banked up so that I could go. But it was just a really a joy to meet so many of the people that are on the stage, to work with them, to fellowship with them, to share joys and share sorrows, and to meet so many of you. This has been a really wonderful time to celebrate who we are as people, how far we've come, to make new acquaintances and to continue with the vision.
So my name is Lisa Bowe, and I really do have to foray into the next panel, but I'm only going to be on one panel. I won't take two panels' times. But I came into this movement. I went to I'm from Wichita, Kansas, went to a small liberal arts college, College of Worcester in Worcester, Ohio. And there, in order to graduate, you have to do this big old long thing called an independent study. My junior year, I did it comparing Mary Daly and Rosemary Luther. And I came from like Wichita, right? And then my senior year, I did it on gays and lesbians and the ordination process in the Presbyterian Church. I did this 100-page paper, which God knows I've never done since. And I wrote the paper using all that background material that we heard about yesterday. And then I interviewed by telephone 14 persons who were somewhere in the process of being ordained in the Presbyterian Church. Now, so I met by telephone all these people that now are some of my best friends. The out people were like Chris and Sandy and Janie, and there may have been another out person Some people were in between, out and in. And then there were these very, very kind of probably some of the people that went to the Talented Women's Conference, who, like, I had to call at a third-party number using not even, it was like an alias of an alias. Like, you have to call at 8 p.m. to this phone number, and if somebody who says they're Sue answers, then they'll hand the phone to me. Project X. And so it's a fascinating process, and really I was not identifying as lesbian at all at that time. And wrote this wonderful paper, well, I think it was wonderful. And brought Sandy Broaders, I still have the paper. I brought Sandy Broaders to Worcester to do a talk, and I had the hugest crush on her. And then, was beginning to figure out a little bit who I was. And then I went right to seminary, McCormick Theological Seminary. When I moved into my apartment that first day, I got there and there were some books out, like James Nelson. And I was like, ooh, this could be a good roommate situation. And then by the time I came back after checking in at McCormick, they were all gone. And so I didn't think anything about it. And it was Tammy Lindahl, who was kind of figuring out who she was, but she didn't want me to know that she was figuring out who she was. So we had this little dance, of me kind of saying what I had been involved in college. And eventually, of course, we became just great friends, and we know where she went from there. But so in Chicago, so through the late 70s, I think that we looked at this community began getting built, that I'm sure had its raucous moments because men and women didn't always get along at that time, to say the least. But I came into PLGC Chicago while he was moderator, or going to be moderator the next year, to David's home where a lot of these meetings were held as he was like cataloging his iris and mailing bulbs. We were also having PLGC. Became wonderful friends, of course, as you saw, we needle pointed that banner. That was just a brilliant idea of Barry's. Doug Calderwood and I would go up every free minute from our seminary and go needle point. So I really became a leader at that point, I feel, and it's where I found my community, my home. So by this point, after the 78 group was here yesterday, I think a real community began to evolve for me that I was able to just slide into. I wasn't part of the raucous Adam L or any of that. And I became a national leader in PLGC. I was national moderator for some number of years. Really I have some brain cell problems. I don't remember details sometimes. But that was the time of my life. During that time, David Sint died, and we were kind of his community. Lincoln Park Church and PLGC, tried to take care of helping him with affairs and figuring things out. Ruth Ann Van Loon tried to figure out his finances and his insurance things, and he was kind of stubborn, and it was difficult at times. But I was there when he died, and Gus and Char, we were all washing dishes because that's what you do when someone's dying. And it was an amazing opportunity. So at the end of my interim pastorate, I had since been ordained in October of '86 to an interim campus pastorate. When that was ending, I either wanted to go be a missionary in El Salvador or work with people with AIDS. So I kind of applied both ways, and I ended up getting hired by Chicago House, which was providing housing to homeless persons with AIDS in Chicago. And David Sint coincidentally left his home to them. So it kind of all came into this circle, and I worked with Lincoln Park Church to set up a group that went every Sunday and took meals. And so that's how we got into the AIDS thing. One day, Dan Smith, who I knew from General Assemblies, called and said they had a half-time position for persons with AIDS in their congregation. This was like 1987, I guess. And would I want to come? And I'm like, no, because California is like the end of the earth. That's what people where I come from think that California is. So I really had no desire. So I turned him down. Like 6 months later, he came back to me, or I came back to him something, and I ended up moving to California for this half-time $14,000 a year job. And I thought that would be fine because I live pretty simply. Well, then I learned that everywhere is not like Kansas and I eventually put together with Dan Self a grant and was able to work full-time kind of doing AIDS ministry. So we did that. We lost a lot of people. And I met people in that time who didn't tell their parents they were gay until they were like on their deathbed. And I thought that's where I really learned that silence equals death. And that's the lesson, one of the many lessons I learned. And then I took to the Presbyterians and I was like, we cannot be silent. We cannot stand for now's not the time. We need to move on and get this done. And we started becoming activists as a group. And this was towards the end of my monitorial that Howard Warren came in. And we thought he was a little, so I'm going to throw out some of the dissension here, okay? We thought he was a little bit of a loose cannon. Because he was, you know, he was just, he had been really screwed over throughout much of his life. The poor, you know, was, you know, the self-degradation that I want to say to younger people here that you hopefully never knew and will never know, that we all went through. And Howard had just come out and he came flying out and he's HIV positive, so why should he really care about now's not the time, you know? It wasn't. And we were afraid he was gonna upset people more than just by our very presence upset people, you know? But we kind of went along and they had me sit by him before he was gonna go up and really his PHP way, everybody was scared that he's gonna be this crazy man, you know? And, but I was like, you know, he's got a point. And really, so we just became a little more activist and we started not going for this, we can't do this quietly. We can't do this, give them more time. We don't have the time. Our people are dying. And the Presbyterian Church is not here for us. So we started kind of Presbyterians Act Up. And PLGC wasn't thrilled with all that a little bit. You know, but we even when More Light Churches Conference started, PLGC was a little threatened by that. Okay, so it wasn't all just smooth sailing. And the biggest thing that we did was in 1991, Baltimore, and this is before we called it Presbyterian Act Up, it was actually before Howard was involved, I think, is we built this huge cross. And it was like 8 foot by 4 foot. And Janie's sister carried it around and from the lumber yard, got all the lumber in this convertible, and then we're carrying this, you know, these huge boards into the Hilton or Hyatt or wherever we were staying, and then we had to sleep with the cross in our room, and it was just terrible. But what we did, because you guys, I feel like this is like really old person. You guys, we couldn't even get 5 minutes of the moderator's time at that time. The moderators were, they didn't want to be seen with us. So when they did start, once they got elected, we always asked them for 5 minutes of their time. And eventually somebody, and I don't know who the first one was, let us come do a suite like 10:30 at night. That's when he had the time and when nobody would see us going in. And so we had our 5 minutes and we were oh so grateful. You know, really so paternalistic the whole way the whole thing was set up. But we were given 5 minutes because the human sexuality report had been submitted and no one read the damn thing. It was so wonderful, but it was the right wing just shut it down before it even got opened to the commissioners, and it was horrible. So we knew this was going to go down. I don't think we really knew it before we got there. I didn't, but we knew during the assembly it was not going to get any airtime. So we were given 5 minutes to have a silent protest. So we were silent and we marched forward with this huge 8-foot cross, very heavy actually. And then we had to, you know, what we did was through the silence is we just started nailing. And one at a time, we did big nails. And the lesbians helped. It was haunting. It was haunting. And the silence in the entire hall. And it was haunting. And so that was the beginning, I guess, of Presbyterian Act Up, was starting doing that. And that one was approved, but then the following year, we were not given our 5 minutes. That was enough. And, but we built this big door. Once again, we had the help of our sisters to construct a door. And we, they wouldn't let us in, but we came in anyway. And we went at the back of the assembly because they wouldn't let us at the front of the assembly, and we did our coming through the door. And it was very powerful once again. And then kind of started the Howards going up in the middle without being invited. You know, until this point, we kept getting permission and invited, and we did it a little bit if we weren't invited, but we did not go full-fledged like Howard as you see him out front in all his gadflyness. And so we also every year had the PLGC suite that and Vinny kept stocked with food, and that was our lifeline for people sometimes. Some people came to that assembly not knowing anyone else who ever even accepted a gay person. And if they themselves were gay or they were there to figure out how they felt about a family member or a friend, they could come to the suite and there'd always be someone there to talk to them. And we could sleep like 16 people in that suite. And we did all this on the down low of money. Not quite as much as Cleve did, but so I guess I just wanted to give a little bit of flavor to those days. And then the shirt I'm wearing, this debate must end. Include us, ordain us, let us serve. This came out of 2001, I believe, in Long Beach, which was our biggest act up. And that's when we joined with Mel and Soul Force. And about 90, some of us got arrested. And we said the paddy wagon, what was really an air-conditioned bus, that they took us to a preordained spot in the park where they processed us. And William B. Thompson got arrested with us. And Jenny, of course, it was wonderful. So that leads us, I think, into the next panel, but I won't keep going on.
Wait a minute. Oh, no. Wait till you hear his story. How many people were at the Long Beach Assembly?
I'm sorry, Long Beach Assembly got arrested. Raise your hands.
All right. Thank you, Lisa, saying here's dementia talking. I'm Marvin Ellison. I'm on panel 3. This is panel 2. But I am the segue because I was on the 91 Sexuality Task Force with Dan Smith. And so I'll be talking more about that when my real panel is there. While I have the floor, I just want to say greetings from Mike Smith and Sylvia Thorson Smith. They have been longtime allies and ACT UP activists. Sylvia thought about sending words, but then she rethought that and sent me a package, which was waiting for me. Here's Sylvia's rainbow boa. And I think if you would like me to take a picture of you wearing the boa, you can send those to Mike and Sylvia. For some reason, they thought going to France and Spain to celebrate their 25th wedding anniversary took priority, and I think we need to. Unbelievable that they would miss this. But, all right, put it on.
Put it on. Okay, and then because I knew he wasn't going to speak otherwise.
Beautiful. So we have. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, but it was the people who came, stood up.
The mic. Use the mic.
Yes.
Use the mic, please. There's 2 mics up there.
The other part about the 91 Cross, y'all carried it down there and nailed it. Then people just got up out of their seats and joined the procession around the hall.
Yeah.
And
we sang to them.
yes, it was amazing.
We sang the opening song of this gathering, we are marching in the light of God.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So we have 5 minutes. So consider what you're going to say carefully. And if I think you're going on, I'm going to come and stand next to you gently. And so we have questions, comments, something you want to add.
Yeah, I just want to add, I'll go over here.
Sure, say your name.
My name is Diane Inkster, and this is Ralph. And I just want y'all to remember about Create Justice, which was a ministry that was funded by the Presbytery of Tennessee Valley.
From that mission giving, whole mission for the whole denomination back in the late 70s, early 80s.
And it was by 1981 or so, and we were funded by the Presbytery to go around. We had a staff member, and I really want you to remember Lynn Nelson, who was staff to that committee, who is now in hospice.
It was great. Everybody thought that she was lesbian because she was chairing this
Yeah.
whole mission challenge, the challenge project, Create Justice.
Yeah.
Church responsibility to educate and advocate toward equality and justice for lesbian and gay persons. And it was an ecumenical civil rights advocacy project funded for $5,000 in the early 80s.
Wow. Yes, and we, what we did, which I think is really important because of what happened with Downtown Church, was we first of all, the service, remember that service we had for Presbytery? We took over the whole Presbytery service, and that was amazing. It was really very, very moving. We had Lynn, I think, helped design the service, but we had, I'm sorry if I take too much time, but we had folks sitting all throughout the Presbytery. And when we did the service, instead of having just everybody up front, people just stood up from within the Presbytery and started telling their stories. And it was incredible. We wanted people to know that we were everywhere. But we went around to churches all throughout the Presbytery with groups of people every time with one person who's out who told their story. And that was what set the stage for Downtown Church to be calling Jamie when they decided to fund, actually call her as a minister, which didn't work.
And then it also helped to have Linda Bredner, who mentioned
Yeah.
earlier, to be in Genesee Valley Presbytery. That's how I met Janie, when Linda and others invited Janie to come to share her coming out story, earlier in the day. But one thing is really kind of,
We have other questions over here, folks.
Yeah.
One piece though that is so crucial now is for those who know, this was before the internet. This was before cell phones.
Right.
So this was the way community was formed. And everybody thought we were the only gay person in the world. Nobody had communication with anybody. And that's how this networking happened.
Just a quick comment to this glorious, fabulous panel. Thank you, everybody. I found a file folder that was very old and very yellowed and very dusty, but in it there was the dissent written by a bunch of folks, but submitted by the commissioners of the 78 Assembly once the vote was taken. It's a fabulous document, and we have copies here. I think that they might be on the counter, but you should look at that. That's possibly the first dissent from our movement for an action of a General Assembly. The other, is the 1980 regional gathering of PGC. Howard Rice preached, and it's a fabulous sermon, and I found a copy of that, so there are copies of that as well. So just look for those. These are, whoever wants to become, or if there is an archive, you're welcome to them.
Somebody else?
Meanwhile, back in the South, it's interesting that all the folks up here were from the Northern Stream. And one of the things that was happening in the Southern Stream was studying, of course, lots of studying. And one of the fears that I identified at that time was ordination of women in the Northern Church had been required. And people who did not believe in conscience, they could ordain a woman, were required to leave the denomination in their conscience. In the Southern Church, there was never a requirement to ordain women. Rachel Hinderlight was ordained under the Extraordinary Clause as a religious educator and ethics professor. And many other women were ordained, but they were not ever forbidden, nor were people required. So no one ever lost their buildings or anything. So that dynamic was background for why the Southern Church never made a definitive guidance or any requirement. So Jim Andrews interpreted to me and my partner, Wynn Ledgerton, as we came out, that she could be ordained, I could be ordained as an elder, there was no prohibition. So that paper that came out of Theology and Culture was respecting the conscience of any presbytery in any congregation. So when we look at how we affect change, there again, like in the civil rights movement, there was acting up and there was dialogue. And I remember Janie saying, it's a movement, it's not an organization. And in the movement, we all have to go where, as a Quaker, I would say, where we are led, where we're called. And so that dynamic led at the time to a lot of hurt feelings, a lot of pain, a lot of misunderstanding. But now, as we kind of look back, it's like an opera that went on forever. And suddenly, the curtain came up, and we can all say who we really were.
What a great way to end this section.
Really quick thing, and I apologize, I went to the next, but in 1985, here at Stony Point, Church and Society put on a conference called Breaking the Silence. And that was 84. Okay, that was a big deal. That's the first time I got to meet these people. And then Jim Anderson faithfully did this More Light update every month, and you see a few back there. That was our way of communication, and it was amazing. And he and his partner and mother-in-law would fold them, print them, staple them, bring a little Rutgers party over and do that. So we got to remember him during this decade. He would be up here.
Thank you. What a beautiful job. So what we're going to do now is take a break for 5 minutes. So if you need to pee, stretch, do all that, come back. We're going to start with panel 3. And just so you know, we're going to break for lunch at noon instead of at 11:45. So go ahead, do what you need to do, stretch, and then come on back, and we'll start in 5 minutes.
Hi there. Hey, Ren, how are you, friend? How's it going? Going great. Good seeing you. Be with us. I'm delighted to be here. All right, man. Glad I'm here at least for a day. And Marty.
Hello, Marty. I'm Ray.
Hello, Ray. I'm like,
How are you? Yeah, well, I couldn't remember the school I'm about 2 hours. I love, yeah. 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 What? Oh.
Okay, everybody, let's gather back. Come on back in from the highways and byways. Come on, come on, come on. Panel number 3, you should be making your way to the front. Okay. Panel number 3, come on up. Okay, everybody, come on in, have a seat. Okay, we're going to go ahead and begin, so please come in and have a seat. All of you in the back who are standing up, please have a seat. Beautiful. Okay, while you're finishing coming in the room, I think we had a couple other people join us, if I'm not mistaken. So do you want to say hello and let us know your name and where you're located?
I'm Arden Leach, and I am in Albany at Westminster Presbyterian Church, and I'm the representative for More Light and Presbyterian Rainbow from Westminster. And we just recently, last year or the year before, passed those resolutions. So I'm very glad to be here with my friend Arthur Fullerton, who is
not a friend of long standing, but for a few years now, so welcome to our church.
And, we have a lot of fun here.
Welcome to both of you. We're so glad you're here. And we're in a little bit of a time crunch, which is the pace that we're going at. So this is panel 3, and this is 1986 to 1993. Okay? Just a reminder to say your name as you're starting to talk so people know who you are.
All right.
Oh, thank you for drinking too.
Wow, that was great.
I want to get you.
I'm Lisa Largis, and man, I appreciate all of this, and most of you do too. But I'm going to continue the pattern of just sharing personal stories. And one of the things that we haven't talked a lot about here is our families, and so one of the things I want to talk about is when I first came out to the church and to my family, it was tough on them, and it was tough for them to have a daughter who was publicly out, and thinking back now, I was in my mid 20s then, and I did the best I could, but thinking back, I wonder, could I have done things differently to make it less painful for them? And I'm so proud of my mom and dad for hanging in there with me and becoming fierce, how that happens. The other thing I want to say is I'm still tremendously wimpy about conflict. And so God is going to keep teaching me until I begin to be more gracious about it. But so for me, coming out was not in any way in my natural inclination. But I went to seminary, San Francisco Theological Seminary in 1985. So I arrived in the middle of the AIDS pandemic there as young gay men were dying every day, and so I became involved in that. And what Lisa said about the silence equals death, we were living that out. These beautiful young men were dying, and their families weren't there with them, and people didn't know who they were. And anyway, when I finished seminary, I just realized that I couldn't do what I had intended to do, which was just to stay in the closet and pursue ordination. And just for my own mental health, I couldn't do it. And so I just stalled. I didn't do anything with my candidacy until a year and a half later, when the committee caught up with me and said, we have to do your interview to certify your ACL. So I just, at that time, there were two paths that we followed. The folks that I knew, either you stayed in the closet and pursued ordination, or you dropped out quietly. And it just, it was one of the moments in my life where I got indignant enough that the church had this ridiculous definitive guidance, and they were comfortable in enforcing it because they never faced a real person and said to us directly, no, you can't be ordained. And I'm like, this is your damn policy, and for God's sake, you are going to enforce it. You're going to have to sit in front of me and tell me, no, you can't be ordained, Anyway, so I wrote this letter to the committee, and then I went and met with them, and they were just so goddamn beautiful, and they were like, well, we think you are called to ministry, and you're going to pray. And I'm like, wow, that didn't work.
And, and so that was the early days. And that's kind of what started me on my path and got me involved with PLGC and all of those things. So, yeah, I'll stop there. But thank you. I am not so good at this.
Okay. Oh, thank you. I'm Martin Ellison. I was a member of the Special Committee on Human Sexuality. When that reported out at the Baltimore General Assembly in 1991, but we began our work in 1988. It was the first major study of the newly reunited Presbyterian Church. And I thought it was a sign that we Presbyterians really have a death wish. We cannot stay united very long. I went through my files and found a bunch of responses to the report, but let me just read you one that appeared in Newsweek magazine a month before the General Assembly in Baltimore, in an article entitled "Roll Over John Calvin." And here it goes. Until now, no Christian denomination has seriously considered the wholesale rejection of traditional sexual ethics as outdated and oppressive, much less blessing homosexuality, fornication, and other behavior that it once found sinful. That, in sum, is the challenge facing the Presbyterian Church USA from a highly controversial report on human sexuality to be debated next month at the church's General Assembly. The report, quote, reads like a sermon on Eros, prepared in the heat of politically correct passion. Presbyterian layman said it was barnyard theology. And it sort of went down from there. No surprise to any of us, that report was overwhelmingly rejected by the General Assembly. The one vote that the conservatives lost was to so torpedo the report that it would never see the light of day again. They lost that vote. So it continued to be a bestseller and was used in many denominations, used by the World Council of Churches, had a broad influence. And I've said worse things than being banned in Baltimore because it only gave us more notoriety and more attention. So it was really quite remarkable. One of the things that the task force group did early on is made a decision that we had a choice. We could either try to nudge the church very gently to take the next baby step around issues of sex, gender, sexuality, or we could tell the truth about our lives, our struggle, our pain, our outrage, our commitment to challenge sexual oppression, sexual injustice in all its forms, and to look honestly at how the Christian tradition was implicated in the problem, and yet also had resources and energy to move toward transformation. And we didn't try to speak for the church, we tried to offer a word that had not yet been spoken clearly in the church, which was a word of hope around sexual justice. One of the things that was different about this report than previous church reports is that it adopted a liberationist methodology, which meant that we took seriously and placed at the center of the conversation the voices of those who had been made to suffer and who were marginalized by the church's conventional theology and ethic around gender and sexuality. So we listened and heard the voices of survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault, people living with disabilities, people of color, queer people, and on and on. And we made those central to the conversation. And when you make a different group central to the conversation, you have a different discourse. So no wonder it was both unfamiliar to many in the church, not all, but to many, and why it was so frightening. The other thing I think that led Karen Levax at Pacific School of Religion to write a review that started by saying, at last, at last, a church report on sex worth reading.
Wow.
At last, a study that places these issues in the context of justice making. So I think what we tried to do was not in any quick way, but a way that we thought would help to challenge and start a reversal away from a racist, patriarchal, Christian theology and ethic around sex and sexuality, to shift to a sex-positive, queer-friendly, feminist, anti-violent ethic and theology. Because I think, regardless of how we can rightly celebrate the changes that we've seen in the last 25 years, none of us should minimize what the battle is that we're engaged in. It is to reverse patriarchal Christianity and move it to becoming a genuinely liberating faith tradition.
So Marv, I'm gonna ask you to bring yours to a close, just to let you know, you're each gonna have about 3 minutes. And so if somebody takes more than 3 minutes, somebody else needs to take fewer than 3 minutes. So that's the issue we're running up against right now.
So thanks, Beth, and let me pass it, good segue, to Susan.
Hello, both Ralph and Chris in the past hours we've had together have said, not hearing much about bisexuality these days. I'm sort of your resident bisexual activist, and having come out to myself and well, way early when I was in seminary working this all through, I have begun writing and doing workshops and having quite a wonderful time, although it's been active, helping bring education, which I still believe is needed to this subject. One of the things in the sexuality report that was disappointing to me was that the word bisexuality is in one time, possibly two, but it says this is something we've chosen not to deal with because this is not the place. And John Perry was interviewed for Church and whatever Society, and he said there were a few things we could not bring up, but there were 5 things we definitely couldn't mention, and the first was bisexuality. So I am ever grateful to our favorite Marvin Ellison and Sylvia Thorson Smith for bringing out a second book, Body and Soul, Rethinking Sexuality as Justice, Love, and going back 10 years after to see what was not included, how they might rethink some of these things, trans issues, much more on body, and bisexuality. So I am pleased to be here. I encourage all of us, when the subject comes up, to do some education. And, you know, the word is not a helpful word, but do what you can. There are lots of folks out there that need to know. Thank you.
I'm Marty Reitmeyer from Atlanta, Georgia, and I cannot thank Georgiana enough for all that she said about the South, because that's exactly the truth. You knew who was out, you knew who was gay or lesbian, but weren't out, and you just got to know each other. And that was my life. Up until I couldn't stand it any longer, when I was working as the educator in the very church I'm back in. So it's a full circle story, to say that I had to get away and find out if I could stay in the church and still be true to myself. So I went to China, as far away as I could go. I really wanted to go to Africa, but I ended up in China, and God has a wonderful sense of humor and sent me to a university where I lived in a dormitory with 37 African men. During that time, I had an incredible Damascus story that at 11:45 I'm going to go record. But I'll fast forward to say, God spoke to me personally to say, I love you just the way you are. But the transforming moment was in 1989 when I went to the Association of Presbyterian Church Educators / Presbyterian Health Education Welfare Association joint conference in Oakland, California. For 3 days, I circled a booth. And on the third day, got up enough nerve to walk over and meet Jamie Spark. And at that point, I had a woman at the well experience. And what God had said to me came alive in a person. I didn't come out until I was fired from my job in 1991 for rumors that I was gay. By 1993, when That All May Freely Serve started, there was a gathering of a group of people who knew in a home in Atlanta who became a part, and we went to a conference in Rochester. And I remember saying, Jamie was personing the issue, the whole thing, personing the issue, and I said, Jamie will not be received in the South, not because she's a lesbian, but because she's a Yankee.
And she talks funny.
And from that point on, I began to travel with her as a Southerner. We went through Alabama and South Carolina and Georgia, and in 2002 became the volunteer evangelist for That All May Freely Serve. And in 2010, I went back to the church I had started in as an out lesbian with a partner, and the same Republican, suburban, conservative church, and we are having a ball.
I love her.
I'm Susan Hartley. I came into the ministry from Christ Church Presbyterian in Burlington, Vermont. That's who sponsored me. I helped them write their More Light statement, their original one, under Bill Hollister way back very early, maybe 84. Enough so that when I went to the candidates committee in 84, they turned me down because I was from a More Light church. Not being a shy violet, I complained and got a rehearing and was eventually accepted. I refused to leave my family in Burlington and go to McCormick, to Chicago for seminary without being fully approved as a candidate, because I was giving up 2 ministries that I really loved in Burlington in order to do that. So they finally gave me permission to go. I got to McCormick in 1986 and met a number of you who were at McCormick and discovered that indeed justice, the kind of justice that we had worked on at Christ Church Presbyterian, which was across the board, economic justice, racial justice, sexual justice, and so on, was really needed to focus on, I'm bringing inclusivity and ordination rights to everyone. I am an ally. I had a small part, but I eventually ended up pastoring the church that was, one of the 4 churches in Genesee Valley Presbytery that opposed Jane's installation at a downtown church. And in 1999, long after that All My Freely Served had started, I had been very close to Tammy Lindahl and Martha Juliet. Tammy was my seminary internship sponsor, and I had met Jamie and Meryl Proudfoot and all the folks around, Carol Seaton, all the folks around in Kansas City, and found that indeed I was being called to this church that was causing so much pain. I called Janie and said, I'm not jumping ship, but I feel called to come and to see what I could do to transform that church so that that church doesn't continue persecuting other GLBT folk. And so I began a ministry there 15 years ago, and that has happened. We have been transformed. All the other churches who were signed on to that have left the denomination, but Scottsville Church is healthy and progressive and gonna do just fine when I retire in a month.
Tricia Dykers Koenig.
Yay, Leo.
Hey, Susan. My call to the ministry that's been mine, I guess, for a couple of decades plus now, began when I was a commissioner to the 1991 General Assembly, and didn't like what happened there before, during, after. And my view was either my understanding of Jesus is correct or what the church has just done is correct, but these are mutually exclusive things. So when I came home from the General Assembly, I set out to educate myself about the issues around homosexuality. I read the 1978 report, I read the 91 report, of course, did not vote with the majority on that, but read 78, thought Byron, thought it was brilliant. My congregation that my husband and I were serving at the time was the type that if the General Assembly said study something, we did. And the General Assembly said study the report. They didn't accept the report, but they did commend it and suggest people to study it. So my congregation started studying, and that began a process that ended in our becoming a More Light church. One of the great things that happened was that when we were going through that process, there were about 60-ish More Light churches at the time. This was about 1992. And we sent a letter to all of them asking about their experience, had about 6 questions. What was it like in various things? We got the best responses back. I still have that notebook of responses of the churches being more light. And so we went through that process. But then personally, I got myself for some reason on a mailing list from somewhere and got an invitation to come to a meeting in Baltimore, near Baltimore, in 1993, after the General Assembly there. Okay, I would not have been able to say that. But, and I said to Mark, my partner, I feel like I should go to this. So he said, okay, you should go to this. So I went, I flew in. Mel Willer picked me up from the airport and, welcome, welcome. Who are you? I didn't know anybody except Martha Juliet when I got there, because she had been a seminary classmate, but I didn't know anybody else. And by the end of this meeting, we sat around in a tent. Georgia Wilcoxon put this stuff all together. We sat around in a tent and, what are we going to do next? And we had these, I don't know, newsprint galore about plans and that kind of thing. And Betsy Hall, I recall this, like Lorraine's sister. this was the type of thing where I said, we need a task force to go forward with these ideas, and people were suggesting other people, and Betsy suggested me. And I said, okay. And I remember calling Mark in the airport, because I was going back to get a Presbyterian meeting that evening, and I put on a dress and everything for this Presbyterian meeting. And I'm talking to him in the airport before cell phones, of course, on a payphone, and sort of sheepishly saying to him, I got nominated and I agreed to be on this task force. He said, I knew you would. So, anyway, so that was the beginning of what we call the Unity Through Diversity Project. And the 93 Assembly had said, there's going to be a dialogue period. So we thought, well we're going to use that period to try to build up to the 1996 General Assembly. And I was one who was willing to do stuff like keep a list of contacts in different presbyteries and try to figure out who the commissioners were who were coming to the General Assembly. And in 96, we got our heads handed to us at that General Assembly. So that organizing didn't work very well. But Scott Anderson was the chair of our group, and he said to me, he's also at that time been with Lorene, co-leading the PLGC. So Scott said, would you be willing in 97, our project's over, but would you be willing to continue to do commissioner tracking and that kind of thing? So I said, sure. And the 97 Assembly tried to reverse what the 96 Assembly and the Presbyteries had done and passed what we now call the First Amendment A. And that happened because Tim Hart Anderson, who had been a commissioner to the 96 Assembly, basically said, we're not going to leave it there. We're going to change it. And he and Pam Byers came to the 97 Assembly. They used tracking that we had done and hijacked an overture that had come to the Assembly to make Amendment B, which was NG 60106B, kind of worse, and turned it around. And that worked. The Syracuse Assembly passed that. The Covenant Network of Presbyterians came into being in 97 to try to help pass that. I then went on the PLGC board, was part of the merger between PLGC and NLCN. In 2000, Tim and Pam offered me a job doing full-time for pay, what I had been doing half-time, basically, while I was serving at church half-time for free. And so when somebody offers you a job doing something that you would do for free, take that.
My name is Lorene LaFontaine, and it's so, it's so hard. I mean, I feel like we're testifying on some level, 3 minutes, and to bring together kind of my beginning in 91 to really to the end of the 90s. And it's a little emotional for me because, you know, I now serve a church. I never happened. And so going back is, you know, it's some raw stuff, but we did some fabulous stuff. In 1991, I went to the Baltimore Assembly. I was in Denver, Colorado. I had been coming out intellectually at Princeton Seminary. It was such a fun place to be as a graduate of Princeton. And so I knew actually, I did CPE in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I dated a guy who was becoming a priest. And because at Princeton Senior Panic, you wanted to get married because you want a job. And he said to me at one point when he came back to Princeton to visit my senior year, he said, Lorene, when are you going to deal with the fact that you're a lesbian? What a gift, right? And so I went out to Colorado. I did 2 years of CPE. What a fabulous way to come out. Doing all that process in that experience. But then I served a church in the burbs in Littleton, Colorado, and I realized that my fear was paralyzing me and causing me to try to live fairly bifurcated. The woman that I was with at the time, she would come to church as the second hymn began, when I was preaching. She would leave right at this, as the closing hymn. And then, so I was trying to live this separate life. And I realized it was really killing me. And so I'm like, screw this. I'm going to go see what's happening in Baltimore. And I'm going to go and I'm going to say enough. I'm going to leave. Because there were no gay and lesbian folks in Denver Presbyterian. And so a pastor who knew Janie said, you need to talk to Janie Spar. And I'm like, okay. And so I go back, come to the hearings were going on. I had no clue about timing and all that. And I hear Ann Heyman say, a concubine in every home, biblical sexuality. I thought, I have arrived home. Someone's speaking the truth. And Jim Anderson, I met Jim Anderson. He said, Lorene, there is a place for you. And experiencing this whole community that Denver, it was really, it's fun to be here with listening to kind of the, Chicago, San Francisco, all the areas that have strong Presbyterian presence with queers. And Denver was really bleak. And so this community became my lifeline. And I helped build the cross. And then the next year helped build, because I can build things. And helped build the door. And it was the whole dilemma. Lisa Bove says, are you going to really be out? And I was like, oh, shit. And so I went home, back to Denver. And what was also happening politically was Amendment 2 was in the process of being passed. Now, I know it's important to remember our church history, but it's also important to remember what was happening legislatively. And so when Amendment 2 passed, and I always tell the story, Amendment 2 passed, and I thought, I am complicit in its passing because I'm not totally out. And so finally said, no, I have to be totally out. And then everything else is just nuts, crazy. Was elected on the board of PLGC. Bob, where are you, Bob Patton? Our wonderful introvert, he and I co-led as moderators. I'm sorry for being such an extrovert. But, and it really was formative in that through those years, it taught me how to lead. The whole conversation about bisexuality, I look back and go, holy crap, how could I have known? How do we learn to lead so that we can educate ourselves? And then around trans issues. And I think that's the thing that was really formative those years up until I think I really just walked away in '99 because I was so burnt out. I was also directing Equality Colorado, which was a statewide interfaith network that was a response to Amendment 2, civil rights organizing for queers in the religious communities. It was an incredible experience, but it was hard. There wasn't a lot of support. So I just kind of stepped away and I said, I'm going to go teach high school at an all-girls Catholic school. Which I did, and as an out person. And so there's so many things. I mean, it's like we took over the assembly in '93, scared the hell out of a lot of people, even our own people, Learned a lot that if you take the floor, you have to have an exit strategy off the floor. It's all about, and I think as we do this movement, it's all about this learning process and that we're gracious with one another. It's not a picnic. I can say now, and I wish there was an opportunity maybe in the future in peace, that when we get our people into parishes, that we figure out how to support them, because it has been brutal in my experience. And our people are not, our congregations are not where we need them to be. So I'm just grateful. It's just been fun. There's so many things. It's like the strawberry thing. The one last thing that we lived on a budget, so we all slept in the same room, right? And I was in a room once, and then Lindsay Biddle said, "Oh, I'm gonna go see my husband." I said, "Well, don't you mean your partner?" She goes, "No, I'm straight." I'm like, "You are?" Lights are out. And then somebody else was in the room, Marsha said, "I'm straight too." I'm like, "Where the hell are the lesbians?" Learn early on, it's about allies. So anyway, thank you very much.
I'm Babs Miller from Austin, Texas, and I think I am the newest
ordained out lesbian. And for me, it's especially significant because it happened in Mission Presbytery in South Texas. Not exactly the home of welcoming things. But my the experience I want to talk about happened in '93. Prior to that, God and all of God's infinite sense of humor and wisdom that I don't understand had sent me to a homophobic seminary in the South to find out that I was a lesbian. So then I thought, well, we battled that out while I was at seminary, whether or not I really should be there or not. And God, did you make a mistake? I think you did, and that sort of stuff. And it didn't work. So I thought, okay, I can do this. I can get a call. Who's going to suspect this woman who's going to come with me to this call, who is 15 years or 20 years my junior, my partner? You know, nobody would be suspicious of that, will they? But I found out, of course, it couldn't work. So, and I found out that in integrity for me, and one of the things we've talked about throughout this whole process is how we all find what is integrity for us. And integrity for me meant that I could not be in the closet. So I became the designated lesbian for Mission Presbytery at that point. And Ellen Babinski was a professor friend of mine at Austin Seminary, and she calls me up and she says, you've got to come. I was working for the state by this time. And she calls me up and she says, you've got to come to the seminary. We're doing a service. The gay community at the seminary is doing an evening. They couldn't do it during the day. It had to be in the dark of night. They're doing an evening ceremony in solidarity with the Reverend J.D. Spar. And I had heard a little bit about this J.D. Spar person. I didn't know her at that time. And that all that was going on in Baltimore, not Baltimore, in Rochester. And so she said, you've got to come to this service. And I said, I can't. I've got to be in Wichita Falls, which is 300 miles away, 9 o'clock the next morning for an appointment that I have in my job. She says, no, you've got to come to this service. All right, Ellen, I'll come to this service and I'll just drive all night, you know. And so I go to this service and the service starts. And a few weeks before, I had given up my candidacy. And I had to do it by writing a one-sentence statement, which I could not read, which would be read for me on the floor of Presbytery, renouncing my candidacy. I'd been certified ready to seek a call prior to that. And I thought, okay, I went to that Presbytery meeting, and the most disappointing thing to me was that no one asked a single solitary question of me, privately or from the floor of Presbytery. And I had been chair of their nominating committee before I went to seminary. I mean, these were people who knew me. So I left that meeting and, you know, basically probably said, F you God, and went to MCC and became on staff there. And so I go to this service for Janie, and I really go wanting to celebrate that they figured out a way for her to do this, and that was exciting. But I went there and cried through that entire service, gave Ellen a hug afterwards, got in my car, and cried for 300 miles. All the way to Wichita Falls, because as much as I wanted to celebrate what was happening for Janie, I was mourning what I had lost, which for me was my church. The other realization I had at that time was that MCC was not my church. And St. Andrews was doing this crazy thing. St. Andrews Presbyterian Church was doing a Field of Hope service in which they put crosses all over their lawn in recognition of all the people who died of AIDS. I had been at MCC doing funerals for guys who couldn't do it in their home church because their church wouldn't allow it. And here was a Presbyterian church doing this service. And so I went. And one of the first things Jim Rigby said was, anybody is welcome to come up and speak. And I thought, I can speak in a Presbyterian pulpit?
I knocked him down to get up there and speak. It's downhill from there.
Hi, I'm Mary Spears, and Babs and I sat together on purpose. And thank you for talking about finding your own integrity. I came out in seminary and at Union, where I said if you can get through Union in 3 years and come out straight at the end of it, you know you're straight. So I was already a candidate for ordination when I began Union. And I come from one of those, clergy-ridden families. I have the defective gene. And it took me a while to discover this call and about 10 years of really wandering in the wilderness trying to figure out what I was called to. I was an artist, but I was, it was like so when I finally found the call to the ministry, it was really valuable, really precious to me, and really important. And it was who I was. And you know what happens when you get to seminary, God starts playing hardball. And I had already been introduced to historical critical method at Northwood School for Girls. So it wasn't historical critical method for me, which it was for many people. It was that I fell in love with a completely inappropriate person. I had sort of put it out of my mind before. I remember saying to myself when I was 12, oh, everybody goes through a homosexual phase in early adolescence. And I was so obnoxious. But I fell in love with this woman who was 12 years younger than I, completely inappropriate for me in every way. But I just was a mess over her. And I thought, oh, that's how it's supposed to feel. And I felt the connection that I like guys. Some of my best friends are guys. And I'd certainly slept with enough of them. I was trying so hard to act my way into it, But the connection was there in a way that it wasn't. And I've been trying to make it be. So it was really clear to me what was going on. And I had to really struggle because it was the mid-'80s. It was, feminism was in full tilt. Liberation theology was in full tilt. LGBT pride on campus, especially at Union, was in full tilt. And I had to figure out how I was going to be a gay person. I actually don't identify primarily as lesbian. I don't own a pair of Birkenstocks. And, but a gay person, and I like queer. And 30 seconds. Oh. I guess I better stop. Well, what I decided to do was to be, I thought I was the only lipstick lesbian I knew. I didn't even know that there was a term. But that's what it was. I decided to go through the ordination process, privately out and publicly not. So I was, and what happened was, eventually I wound up chairing I started out on the property committee of the Presbytery. I am a dyke. And even though I crawled up on the roofs of churches with, high heels on. And I got to know all those guys, all those buildings and grounds guys, the ones who are Republicans in the Presbytery. And then I got to be a commissioner to GA twice. And in both of them have some good experiences, which I'll tell you about later. And that's it. Thanks.
I'm Jerry Mead from Chicago. In 1992, there was a More Light conference that was held in Chicago. Now, by 1992, Gail and I had been in love for a number of years, since '84 actually.
but it was still just our secret. We both had wonderful men as husbands. We both had young children, and we did not know at all what to do with our love. So we remained in the closet, and I think functioned pretty well as straight allies. Wouldn't you say, Gil?
I'm a straight ally.
And then came the conference. And people were invited to tell their stories if they wished. I did not. But two of our very dear friends, a lesbian couple, proceeded to talk about themselves and come out to the group. And in the meantime, I sat there silent and never afterwards, to thank them, shared anything about myself with them. I left the conference thinking, it's wonderful to be part of a movement, but I'm not really. So it was a pretty painful moment, but an important start. Then the next year, 1993, here comes the invitation to attend Reimagining, the first one. And I looked at the list of presenters, and Gail looked at the list of presenters, because by then we were loving to go to conferences together. So we said, we're going to Reimagining. If any of you were there, you remember the entire room was organized with a group of round tables. We were assigned to specific round tables and then moved around the room, but with the same table. And there was a moment toward the end of the conference when our lesbian sisters were invited to come to the center of the room, which was where the podium was. Yeah, and they were invited to come and be celebrated and receive our prayers. At that point, I would say most of the room was in tears as we watched folks come to the center. At my table, I was in tears, but I stayed at my table. I learned later Gail was doing the same thing at her table because we were judged. So we cried with everyone else, but for very different reasons. Afterwards, when we were walking back to our room, we looked at each other and said, we really, really have to figure this out. We can't keep going on like this. It just hurts too much, and it's too dishonest. Took us another good year and a half before Gail finally had a woman with the well moment with Janie, and that started us to our final coming out. But those 2 years, 92 and 93, were really, really important for me personally.
So before we have our final two people, I'm just gonna let you know so that you're not feeling anxious, that we're gonna use a little bit of our time into lunch. So Katie's gonna go, and then Susan is gonna go. Susan! Okay, so, and then we'll have a little bit of time, but we may need to bring some of the comments into the afternoon portion as well, so just kind of hold all that. Yes.
Or to the lunch tables.
Yeah, say that again.
Or to the lunch table.
Or to the lunch tables, right.
Yeah, conversation.
Oh, this anxiety about time. So, okay. What?
Lola.
I just felt baby. Okay, so I'm the baby in the movement.
Yes.
I'm your baby.
Yeah.
I entered in because of Lisa Bowe.
What's your name?
My name is Katie Morrison. And I was, I believe, the first to come in who had had a positive, warm, loving coming out experience. I was in my first year of college. My parents loved me as they had before. And I had an incredibly positive church experience growing up, a wonderfully active youth group, and a youth pastor who was, when I came out to him, very supportive. That youth pastor, Kathy Porter, happened to know Lisa Bowe over at West Hollywood Presbyterian Church, and she said, oh, when you're home in the summer, you ought to go to church there. So I met Lisa, and then Lisa said, there's this national group that's starting called the National Network of Presbyterian College Women, and they're forming a leadership team where they want to have a representative that reflects
the diversity of our church, and they're looking for a lesbian representative. Maybe you could be the lesbian on that committee. So she connected me with Toddy Peters, brilliant theologian in our denomination, who formed that group to create a ministry for women in college to stay connected to the church. This is how I stayed connected to the church, because of the National Network of Questioning College Women. So I went to that gathering, which was at Stony Point, our first gathering, in college as a sophomore. And then they were going to send a rep to General Assembly for 1992. And I became that rep. So I got sent to General Assembly as the lesbian rep to NNPCW. And that is where I met the people who became my mentors, my heroes, the people who inspired, who made faith real. I had an incredibly solid foundation, but it became real and alive and felt and clear through the faces of the people who loved me as the young person in this movement. And I was, Jim Anderson, come on in. And then, so 92 was Milwaukee. And then for my 21st birthday, I asked my folks for my birthday, would you send me to GA? I want to go back. It was such an incredible experience. So for my 21st birthday, my parents unknowingly sent me to the General Assembly in Orlando, which was an incredible bloodbath.
Yes.
It was a bloodbath, and I want that to be recorded. It was abusive. It was devastating. It was destructive to our spirits that we are still working out today, for fighting for our own mental health from what happened at GAs like that. So I came back to these great, cool, queer folks, you know, and I had my shorts and my hairy legs and my flat top, I think a little mullet, and I hadn't been taught how to dress, you know, in a way that might convince conservatives to like us. You know? Everything was so wonderfully free and happy, and then on the flip side, people waving a Bible on our face. I mean, it was the first time in my life was at a Presbyterian GA where I was told I was going to hell, and that I would be prayed for every day for my soul, my salvation, because of how sinful I was. And to be asked really inappropriate questions. Remember, I just turned 21. Are you sexually active? How are you practicing? And that's in, so then my youthfulness, I'm an unrepentant, self-affirming, practicing lesbian. I'm Presbyterian, and I'm also lesbian. So the faces, and then at that GA, because we used to have our PLGC board meetings, I remember the PLGC meeting in Orlando. There was a couple, I believe this was the couple, Louise Thompson.
Oh, yeah.
Louise
and Pete. Louise and Pete Thompson from Portland, Oregon.
Okay, so I think it was them. I hope to get this right. I remember at that board meeting, because see, this is where it was through going to GA, through meeting PLGC, that I received a call to ministry. And I believe that my call was to ordination. I believe that that is the calling that I had. That was my piece to the movement, to be in the ordination process, fully out, fully who I was, with that incredible support system that I had behind me of my parents, some wonderful church ladies at Pasadena Presbyterian Church, and colleagues also in Southern California and West Hollywood, and this extension to go into the ordination process in San Gabriel Presbyterian, including Simon and Melinda and Baldwin Park and all those great folks, because this is the Presbyterian where Fuller Seminary was, and Jack Rogers chaired the CPM when I first went with my 4-1. This is before Jack Rogers had his journey, thanks to Bear and others. So, okay, back to GA. GA, I think it was Louise that did this. Was it Louise? Okay, there was a stole, I just think it was them, that Louise needle pointed at that PLGC meeting. And I just remember so clearly as a young person, she said, I've made this stole that will go to the first person who is ordained, who is out. This was in 1993. And she passed the stole and she said, I want everybody to touch this. So this stole has been touched by a lot of people who were deep in the trenches. We were far from that goal. And I remember when it came to me touching it, this is maybe ego, but knowing. And well, it was like 2 years after my ordination that Lorene said, oh, there's that stole, I think I need to give it to you. And I got it in a plastic bag. I was like, here's that stole, you know. So it wasn't ceremonious, but but it's not what I feel moved to do, and I need more time, but I know there isn't more time. So maybe we can figure that out. This stole has been touched by the movement over time. And what I want to do, because I'm in my best self when I'm giving gratitude to those who formed me. And it's mixed. And Lorene and folks have said so well, as we do, we were all figuring it out together, individually and together. But Chris Glasser, when he spoke about being a candidate for ministry, and the no that he received, that in essence has lasted through to this day, and the pain that I know I had as an out seminarian, going to school, studying the ordination exams, all of those steps, facing very unopen, unkind people in San Gabriel Presbytery. The pain that I had in a shorter amount of time, to have carried that all these years, I really feel that the rightful holder of this is Chris Glasser, and I would be honored if you would receive this gold. I think we should ordain you as Presbyterians. We love you. And we have enjoyed a lot of pain for a very long time. And we have not forgotten you. You are not forgotten. Yes, okay, I want to say that this is official because I actually was not ordained by the Presbyterian Church. I was ordained by Howard Warren. This is 3 months before the ordination. Jamie and I visited Howard, and Howard was clear, not clear, and clear. And Jamie said, "Look, he's going to be ordained." Howard just put his head up and he flipped into an ordination service. And so it is through the divine procession of spirits, of people who were courageous and put their bodies and souls and hearts out there on the line vulnerably, out of faith and belief and knowing and blessed assurance, despite the cost, so that truth may be seen and felt, so that light may break forth. Those people, it is in that divine succession, Chris Glasser, that we ordain you on this day, yes, in the name of the Presbyterian Church, but yes, in the name of that divine succession of prophets, rock stars, lovers of God, the faithful, patient, trench dwellers. It is time. You are not forgotten for all those years of holding and waiting and wondering. We love you and we ordain you with joy. Amen.
This is very apt up. Praise God. Would you like to okay, we're accepting that. Usually Chris gets us to pay after he's rejected.
I just want to thank you all, and it's a total surprise. And Katie had said that I might wear this during the closing Eucharist, but I had no idea she was going to do this. And I thank you all for expressing so many feelings. And I didn't come here expecting this at all. And I'm very grateful. And I thank God for you. For all of you. Thank God for you, because you have been the church for me. Amen.
Okay, well now Beth gets the mic again.
And no more shit about time.
Okay, here we go. So, folks, let's go ahead and break for lunch. What? Are you leaving? We're gonna break for lunch. We'd like you to be back in this room at 1 o'clock. We're not gonna do a picture. And Jean Richardson is leaving. So say goodbye to Jean. Thank you, panel 3.